My mother used to say those words like she was reminding someone to lock the front door calm, tidy, and without a single tremor. But when the notary cleared his throat, the entire room seemed to run out of air. He was not looking at my stepfather. He was looking at me. And what he was about to read would turn the extra person in this family into the only one holding the keys. My name is Gemma Moore, and I walked into that office with the singular ambition of a convict walking toward a parole hearing he knows he will fail. I just wanted it to be over. The law offices of Braxton Associates were tucked away on the second floor of a limestone building in downtown Madison, Wisconsin, a place that smelled of floor wax, old dust, and the kind of expensive coffee that is brewed only to intimidate clients. It was late February. Outside, the wind was whipping off the lakes, stripping the heat from the sidewalk, but inside, the air was still and heavy. It felt less like a place of business and more like a high-end funeral parlor, where the bodies were buried in paperwork rather than earth. I was 5 minutes early, yet somehow, I was already the last one to arrive. That was the Callaway way. If you are on time, you are late, and if you are early, they will simply arrive earlier to ensure you still feel behind. Harlan Callaway sat at the head of the conference table. He did not look up when I entered. He was studying his cuticles with the intensity of a diamond appraiser. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, the fabric absorbing the dim light of the room. To his right sat Bianca, and to his left, Trent, my step-siblings. They were arranged like a corporate board, a united front of biological perfection. Bianca was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with lethal precision, while Trent leaned back, his arm draped over the empty chair next to him as if guarding it from a ghost. There was one empty chair left. It was at the far end of the table, directly opposite Harlan. The distance felt calculated. It was not a seat for a family member. It was a seat for a defendant. "Sit down, Gemma," Harlan said without lifting his eyes. His voice was a low baritone, cultivated in boardrooms and country clubs, designed to vibrate in your chest and make you feel small. I pulled out the heavy wooden chair. It scraped against the floor, a harsh wooden shriek that made Bianca flinch just slightly. I sat. I placed my hands on my lap, gripping my fingers together until the knuckles turned white. I was 36 years old, a woman with a job, a mortgage, and a life. Yet the moment I stepped into Harlan's orbit, I was 10 years old again, trying to make myself small enough to fit in the gaps between the furniture. "Mr. Braxton will be with us momentarily," Harlan announced to the room. He finally looked at me. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, devoid of warmth. "I thought it best we have a moment of clarity before the official proceedings begin, to manage expectations." I nodded once. "I have no expectations." "Harlan, good," he said, "because that is exactly what you should have." He clasped his hands on the mahogany table. The room was lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes that no one read anymore. They stood like silent judges. "Let us be candid. Gemma," Harlan began, using the tone he reserved for underperforming middle managers. "Your mother was a wonderful woman. I love Daphne very much, but her passing leaves us with the practical matter of the estate, and while she had a soft spot for you, the law operates on facts, not sentiment." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Trent smirked, a quick twitch of the lips that he quickly hid behind a cough. "The fact is," Harlan continued, "I provided for you for 30 years. I put a roof over your head. I paid for the food you ate. I allowed your mother to use my resources to clothe you and send you to those quaint little public schools. I absorbed the cost of your existence. Gemma, I kept a ledger in my head, not out of malice, but out of pragmatism." He leaned forward. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You are not my blood. You are not a Callaway. And frankly, with Daphne gone, the charitable connection between us has expired." I felt the familiar sting, the old wound opening up. It was not the cruelty that hurt. It was the casualness of it. He spoke about disowning me the way one might talk about canceling a magazine subscription. "I understand. I said, my voice steady. I had practiced this. Do not cry. Do not argue. Just survive. I am glad you do, Harlan said. So, when Mr. Braxton comes in, he will read the standard will. It leaves the entirety of the estate to me, naturally, to be managed for the benefit of the family, my family, Bianca and Trent. Bianca finally looked up from her phone. She offered me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a pitying look, the kind you give to a stray dog you have no intention of feeding. It is just better this way, Gemma, she said softly. It keeps things clean. You know how messy these things can get if lines are not drawn. Trent reached into his leather portfolio and slid a thin stack of papers across the long table. They hissed against the polished wood and came to a stop in front of me. We prepared a waiver, Trent said. It states that you accept the terms of the will and forfeit any right to contest it. If you sign it now, Dad, I mean, Harlan is willing to give you a one-time gift, $5,000, for moving expenses, or whatever it is you need. He said $5,000 like it was a king's ransom, yet the way he pushed the paper toward me was how one pushes a napkin used to clean up a spill. I looked down at the document. It was brief, brutal. I, Gemma Moore, hereby waive. Sign it, Harlan commanded softly. Don't make this difficult. You have always been extraneous. Gemma, don't force us to make you an enemy. I picked up the pen lying on the table. My hand did not shake. I was proud of that. I was going to sign, not because I agreed, but because $5,000 was $5,000, and more importantly, the price of my freedom was cheap at twice the amount. I just wanted to walk out into the cold Madison air and never see these people again. The door to the inner office opened. Mr. Elliot Braxton stepped in. He was a man in his 60s, wearing a tweed jacket that looked like it had been woven in the 1950s. He had wild white hair and spectacles perched on the very tip of his nose. He carried a thick file under his arm. "Good morning," Braxton said. His voice was gravelly. He didn't look at the Callaways. He walked straight to the head of the table, but instead of sitting, he remained standing, adjusting his glasses. "Elliot," Harlan said, his voice instantly shifting to a jovial, club member warmth. "We were just handling some housekeeping. Gemma is ready to sign the waiver regarding the standard will. We can wrap this up in 10 minutes. I have a tea time at 1 o'clock. Braxton ignored him. He placed the thick file on the table with a heavy thud. He looked at the waiver in front of me, then he looked at Harlan. "There will be no signing of waivers today," Braxton said. Harlan blinked. "Excuse me. The girl is agreeing to the terms. She knows she gets nothing." "The girl," Braxton repeated. He finally looked at me. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and oddly kind. "Ms. Moore is the primary reason we are gathered here today. Mr. Calloway?" "Don't be ridiculous," Trent snapped. "She is a stepchild. She has no claim. According to the will you filed in 2010, perhaps," Braxton said. He opened the file. "However, my client, Mrs. Daphne Calloway, came to see me quite regularly over the last 15 years, and she was very specific about which documents were to be filed publicly and which were to be activated upon the event of her death." Harlan's face went rigid. "Daphne didn't have any assets. I controlled everything. She had a stipend, housekeeping money." Braxton made a clearing of the throat that sounded suspiciously like a suppressed laugh. It was a dry, dusty sound, like autumn leaves skittering on pavement. He looked at Harlan with an expression that sat somewhere between amusement and pity. "Mr. Calloway," Braxton said, "it appears you labored under several misconceptions regarding your wife's financial acumen and her legal preparations." "This is absurd," Bianca said, her voice losing its softness. "Mother didn't do anything without asking Dad." "Your mother," Braxton corrected, "did not do anything you saw without asking your father. That is a distinction of significant legal weight." Braxton pulled a document from the center of the file. It was bound in blue legal paper. The seal on the front was old, the wax cracked but intact. The document Harlan is referring to, the one giving everything to him, was indeed signed. Braxton said, but it was superseded by a living trust and a prenuptial asset shield established 3 months before their marriage and updated annually. The assets within this trust fall outside the jurisdiction of the marital estate. What assets? Harlan demanded. Standing up, his face was beginning to flush a dangerous shade of red. She had nothing. On the contrary, Braxton said calmly, she had the Moore family inheritance, which she wisely kept entirely separate from your accounts. Harlan, and through aggressive, high-risk investment strategies that she managed herself well, let us just say the principal has grown. The room went silent. The radiator in the corner hissed. How much? Trent asked, his greed overriding his anger. Braxton ignored him. He turned his body fully toward me. Gemma, he said, his voice softening. Your mother left specific instructions. She knew this moment would happen. She predicted this exact scene. She even predicted the waiver. He reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed white envelope. He slid it across the table, past Harlan's clenched fists, past Trent's bewildered stare, directly to my hands. She wanted me to read the opening statement of the trust to you, Braxton said, but she wanted you to hold the letter while I did it. I touched the envelope. It felt warm, though that must have been my imagination. My name was written on the front in her handwriting looping. Elegant, unmistakable. Harlan was trembling. Read it, he snarled. Read whatever fantasy she wrote. It doesn't matter. I will contest it. I will bury you in litigation for 20 years. Braxton looked at Harlan over the rim of his glasses. You can try, Mr. Calloway, but I assure you, Daphne prepared for that too. The notary lifted the document. He took a breath, and his posture straightened. He was no longer just a small-town lawyer. He was the voice of a woman who had been silent for too long. The introduction to the Daphne Moore Revocable Trust, Braxton announced. He looked directly at Harlan, his eyes locking onto my stepfather's. It begins with a quote, Braxton said. A memory, transcribed exactly as she instructed. The room felt like a vacuum. All the oxygen had been sucked out. Braxton read the words, and they were not legal jargon. They were a command. You will get nothing, my mother said calmly. I froze. I remembered those words. I remembered when she said them. But Harlan looked like he had been struck by lightning. He sat down hard, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Braxton continued reading, his voice ringing with the finality of a gavel strike. That is what my husband, Harlan, believes is the destiny of my daughter. But today, the only person who will leave this room with nothing is the man who thought he owned us. The echo of Mr. Braxton's voice faded, but the words themselves, you will get nothing, dragged me backward, pulling me out of that mahogany-paneled office and dropping me straight into the foyer of the house on Elm Street where I learned how to be invisible. I was 5 years old when I learned that silence was a currency. My mother, Daphne, had married Harlan Calloway on a rainy Tuesday in late October. I remember the rain because it was the only thing making a sound that day. Harlan did not like noise. He did not like clutter. And unfortunately for him, a 5-year-old girl is essentially a walking, breathing combination of both. Harlan was a man of public gestures and private vacuums, to the neighbors in Madison. He was the man who shoveled the widow's driveway 3 houses down. He was the man who tipped 20% at the diner, even when the soup was cold. But once the heavy oak door of our house clicked shut, the warmth evaporated from his skin like steam off a mirror. He did not hit me. He did not scream. He simply edited me out of the script. It wasn't a singular traumatic event that defined my childhood. It was 1,000 tiny subtractions. I remember dinner times vividly. The table was a long, oval slab of cherry wood that gleamed under the chandelier. Harlan sat at the head. Naturally, Bianca and Trent, his biological children who arrived 2 years into the marriage, sat on his left and right. My mother sat at the foot, and I sat in the middle, in the demilitarized zone. Harlan would ask Trent about his soccer practice. He would ask Bianca about her piano lessons. He would ask my mother about the grocery bill, and then he would pick up his fork. slice his steak, and begin to eat. He never asked me about school. He never asked me to pass the salt. If I spoke, he would wait until I finished, stare at a spot on the wall just above my left ear for 3 seconds, and then resume his conversation with Trent, as if the air had never been disturbed. After a year of this, I stopped speaking at dinner. After 2 years, I stopped expecting him to look at me. By the time I was 10, I had perfected the art of occupying space without displacing air. I learned to walk on the edges of the staircase to avoid the creaking boards. I learned to read in the closet of my bedroom because Harlan didn't like seeing personal items scattered in the living room. Bianca and Trent were not born cruel. They were simply observant. Children are like water. They flow into the containers their parents build for them. They saw that their father treated me like a piece of furniture that he hadn't chosen but couldn't quite get rid of. So they treated me the same way. It wasn't malice. It was hierarchy. I remember one Christmas when we were taking the family photo. The photographer, a cheerful man with a red bow tie, was trying to frame the shot in front of the fireplace. "Okay, everyone squeeze in," he chirped. "Big smiles." Harlan frowned. He looked at the composition of the bodies through the lens. "It is off balance," Harlan said. He didn't point at me. He didn't have to. "Maybe if the young lady in the blue dress steps to the side," the photographer suggested, sensing the tension. "Just for the first set. We can do a lighting check." I was the young lady in the blue dress. I looked at my mother. This was the part that hurt more than Harlan's coldness. Harlan was the weather. You don't get mad at a blizzard for being cold. But my mother was supposed to be the shelter. Daphne Moore stood there, her hands clasped in front of her velvet skirt. She looked at me, and I saw the familiar panic in her eyes. It was the look of a woman who was constantly calculating the cost of peace. "Just for a minute, Gemma," she said softly. "Go help yourself to a cookie in the kitchen. We will call you back." I walked to the kitchen. I ate a cookie that tasted like dust. They never called me back. When the Christmas cards went out that year, it was just the 4 of them, Harlan, Daphne, Bianca, and Trent. A perfect, symmetrical unit. I found one of the cards in the trash bin in the study months later. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, I really didn't belong. My mother's survival strategy was total submission. She apologized for my existence constantly. If I left my shoes by the door, she would swoop in and hide them before Harlan came home, whispering, "Let's not make trouble." Gemma, if I got a B on a report card, she would sign it quickly and bury it at the bottom of the stack so Harlan wouldn't launch into a lecture about mediocrity being a genetic trait. I hated her for it. I loved her, but I hated her. I wanted her to scream. I wanted her to throw a plate. I wanted her to grab Harlan by his silk tie and tell him that her daughter was a person, not an accounting error, but she never did. She just polished the silver, ironed his shirts, and made herself smaller, just like she taught me to do. When I turned 18, leaving that house didn't feel like a departure. It felt like an escape from a low-oxygen environment. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. I didn't ask Harlan for tuition money. I didn't ask for a car. I had built a suit of armor out of my own pride. I don't need you. I told myself, I don't need any of you. I worked double shifts at a diner. I took student loans. I studied until my eyes burned. And strangely, the universe seemed to offer me these odd, timely mercies. I remember the first one clearly. It was my sophomore year of college. I was $300 short on my tuition payment and was terrifyingly close to being dropped from my classes. I had applied for every grant I could find, but I had been rejected by all the major ones. Then, on a Tuesday, I was called into the financial aid office. The administrator, a tired-looking woman with bifocals, handed me a letter. "You have been selected for the erratic hardship grant," she said. "The what?" I asked. "It is a private donor fund," she explained, "usually for students from rural counties. But apparently the criteria were expanded this morning. It covers the gap in your tuition plus $500 for books." I took the check with trembling hands. I thought I was the luckiest girl in Wisconsin. It happened again 2 years later. I was moving to Chicago for my first real job, and I couldn't afford the security deposit on a safe apartment. I was resigned to living in a basement studio with no windows. Then, my prospective landlord called me. He said that a community revitalization program had subsidized the building, and for first-time tenants, the deposit was waived. I walked into a sunny one-bedroom apartment on the third floor, feeling like I had cheated the system. I never questioned it. Why would I? To question it would be to admit that I wasn't doing this entirely on my own. I needed to believe that my success was a direct result of my grit. It was my revenge against Harlan. Look at me. I thought, I am making it. I am surviving without your money, without your name, without your permission. But now, sitting in that notary office, the memory of one specific afternoon came rushing back to me, a memory that I had misinterpreted for a decade. It was 3 years ago. I had come back to the house to pick up some old boxes from the attic. I wasn't planning to stay for dinner. I was trying to get in and out while Harlan was at the club. But Harlan had come home early. I was in the hallway, holding a box of old yearbooks. When I heard them in the study, the door was ajar. Harlan's voice was raised, which was rare. He sounded desperate. "It is just a liquidity issue. Daphne," he was saying. "The market is correcting. I need access to the reserves. Just sign the authorization. It is my money anyway. I just put it in your name for tax purposes." I froze. I shouldn't have been listening, but old habits die hard. "It is not your money, Harlan," my mother's voice answered. She didn't sound scared. She sounded bored. "Don't play games with me," Harlan snapped. "I have carried this family for 30 years. I have paid for everything. The cars, the vacations, the renovations. You think you can just sit on a pile of cash while I'm trying to save the business?" There was a silence. Then I heard the sound of a third person shifting in a chair. I hadn't realized anyone else was in the room. "Mr. Braxton advises against commingling the assets," my mother said. "Screw Braxton," Harlan shouted. "He is just a notary. He doesn't understand high finance. Daphne, look at me. If this deal falls through, we lose the lake house. Is that what you want?" I peeked through the crack in the hinge. I saw my mother sitting in the leather armchair. She was wearing a beige cardigan, her hands folded in her lap. She looked small. Harlan was looming over her, red-faced, imposing, and in the corner, sitting quietly with a briefcase on his knees, was Mr. Elliot Braxton. Harlan leaned down, placing his hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her. "I need that signature. Daphne, what do you think is going to happen if you don't give it to me? You think you can survive on your own? You have never worked a day in your life. You have nothing without me." My mother looked up at him. Her face was completely smooth. No fear, no anger, just a blank, calm surface. "I am not signing." "Harlan," she said. "Then what?" Harlan spat, pulling away and pacing the rug. "You are going to hoard it. Keep it for yourself. Or maybe you think you are going to give it to that useless daughter of yours. Is that it? You think Gemma deserves a payout?" He laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "Let me tell you something. Daphne, Gemma is never going to see a dime of my hard work. I will make sure of it. I will write the trust so tight she won't even be able to buy a sandwich with the Callaway name." He turned back to her, pointing a finger in her face. "She gets nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." My mother adjusted the cuff of her sweater. She looked over Harlan's shoulder, and for a split second, her eyes met mine through the crack in the door. I flinched, terrified she would call me out. But she didn't. She looked right through me, or past me, to the notary in the corner. Then she looked back at Harlan. "You are right, dear," she said. Her voice was so gentle, so agreeable. It was the voice she used when she was smoothing over a social blunder at a dinner party. "You will get nothing," my mother said calmly. At the time, standing in the hallway with a box of heavy books in my arms, I felt a crack in my heart. I thought she was agreeing with him. I thought she was capitulating, confirming to Harlan that I, Gemma, would get nothing. I thought she was selling me out one last time to keep the peace in her marriage. I turned around and walked out the front door without saying goodbye. I drove back to Chicago in a rage, crying until my vision blurred, swearing I would never ask her for anything again. But sitting here now, in Mr. Braxton's office, with the smell of old paper and the sound of Trent's heavy breathing next to me, the scene replayed in my mind with a new, terrifying clarity. She hadn't been looking at me. She hadn't been talking about me. She had been looking at Harlan. You will get nothing. She wasn't agreeing to his terms. She was delivering a sentence, and Harlan, in his arrogance, in his absolute certainty of his own power, hadn't even heard her. He thought she was an echo, but she was the wall. I looked up at Mr. Braxton. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, as if he knew exactly where my mind had just traveled. He knew. He had been there in the corner, the witness to the moment my mother stopped being a victim and became the executioner. Mr. Braxton did not rush. He adjusted the cuffs of his tweed jacket, picked up a silver letter opener, and sliced through the seal of a second, much thicker blue folder. The sound was sharp, like a fabric tearing, and it seemed to wake the room from the paralysis caused by his last sentence. Harlan was still sitting, but he looked less like a chairman and more like a man who had just realized his chair was suspended over a trapdoor. His face was a mask of rigid confusion. He blinked rapidly, his mind clearly trying to reboot the narrative he had lived by for 30 years. "What do you mean?" "The only person—" Harlan asked. His voice was thinner now. It lacked the resonant bass he used to order waiters around. "Daphne had a checking account with $4,000 in it. I saw the statement last week. I paid for her funeral out of my own pocket because that account was frozen." "That account," Braxton said, sliding a pair of reading glasses onto his nose, "was indeed her household operating fund. It was the money you graciously allowed her to have for groceries and incidentals. However, that account has no relation to the Moore family trust." "The Moore family is dead," Trent interjected. He was leaning forward, his eyes darting between the folder and Braxton. "My mother told us they lost everything in the crash of '87. That is why she married Dad. For stability." Braxton looked at Trent with mild amusement. "Your stepmother told you that because it was the easiest way to explain why she lived frugally," Braxton said. "It is a very effective camouflage. If one appears to have nothing, no one asks for anything. In reality, the Moore estate was consolidated and placed into a blind trust structure 3 months before she married your father. It is a prenuptial asset shield. It is ironclad. It is irrevocable. And it is entirely separate from the marital estate." Harlan scoffed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "A trust, Daphne. She couldn't balance a checkbook without asking me to check the math. You expect me to believe she has been sitting on a fortune?" "She was quite good at math, actually," Braxton said dryly. "She just preferred you to feel needed. It is a common dynamic in asymmetrical marriages." He opened the folder and spread 3 large documents across the table. They were dense with legal text, stamped with dates that went back decades. "The assets within the trust have been managed aggressively," Braxton continued. "Real estate holdings in the Pacific Northwest, municipal bonds, a significant early position in a pharmaceutical logistics firm that went public 10 years ago. Daphne did not touch the principal. She let it compound." "How much?" Bianca asked. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air. She had put her phone down. She was looking at the papers with a hunger that was almost physical. Braxton looked at a summary sheet. "The final valuation is pending a third-party audit of the real estate holdings," he said. "However, based on the closing market numbers from yesterday, the total value of the liquid and non-liquid assets sits somewhere between $19 million and $27 million. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bomb blast before the shockwave hits. $19 million. I sat there, my hands gripping the edge of the table, feeling the blood drain from my face. I had come here hoping for enough money to fix the transmission on my Honda. I had come here prepared to be humiliated for $5,000. The number Braxton had just spoken didn't feel real. It felt like a coordinates number, or a phone number. It was too big to hold in my head. "That is a lie," Harlan whispered. Then he shouted it. "That is a lie. 19 million. If she had that kind of money, why did I pay for the roof repairs last year? Why did I pay for her car insurance?" "Because," Braxton said, "if she had paid for them, you would have asked where the money came from, and then you would have tried to take it." "This is fraud," Bianca announced. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "This is clearly elder abuse. You manipulated a confused woman into signing documents she didn't understand. We will have your license. Mr. Braxton, we will sue this firm into the ground." "Sit down, Bianca," Braxton said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. "I have video recordings of every signing session dating back to 1995. I have affidavits from 2 independent psychiatrists attesting to Daphne's competency for every major amendment to the trust. There is no fraud here. There is only a woman who knew exactly who she was married to." Trent grabbed one of the papers. "I want an audit. I want to see the paper trail. You can't just transfer $20 million to—" He pointed a shaking finger at me to her. "I can, and I will," Braxton said, "because Gemma Moore is the sole biological beneficiary listed in the original instrument. The trust stipulates that upon Daphne's death, the assets bypass the spouse entirely." "I am her husband," Harlan roared. He slammed his hand on the table. The heavy wood vibrated. "I have rights. Wisconsin is a marital property state. Anything she earned or held during the marriage is half mine." "Not if it was acquired prior to the marriage and kept segregated," Braxton countered, his voice cool and professional. "Which she did, flawlessly. She never commingled funds. She never used a joint account to pay a trust fee. She never let a single dollar of your money touch a single dollar of hers. It is a masterpiece of forensic accounting. Mr. Calloway, you should be impressed." Harlan's face was purple. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something other than dismissiveness in his eyes. I saw fear, and I saw hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. "She knew," Harlan hissed. "She knew I was struggling. She knew the business was leveraging debt to stay afloat. And she sat there. She sat there knitting those stupid sweaters while I worked myself to death. She offered to help you once, I believe," Braxton said. "In 2008, you told her she was too stupid to understand the market. You told her to go back to the kitchen." Harlan flinched as if he had been slapped. "I never said that." "I have the transcript," Braxton said. He pulled another sheet of paper from the file. It wasn't a legal deed. It looked like a transcript of a meeting. "This brings us to the second item of business," Braxton said. "Daphne anticipated that you would contest this. She anticipated you would play the grieving, supportive husband who was blindsided by a rogue lawyer. So, she left a record." He held up the paper. 5 years ago, Daphne sat in that chair." Braxton pointed to the empty chair I had avoided. "She came here to finalize the transfer triggers. I asked her, as I am required to do by law, if she wanted to leave a spousal stipend, a token amount, even just a nominal percentage to ensure you couldn't claim you were forgotten by accident." Braxton looked at Harlan. "Do you want to know what she said? It was recorded by the court reporter present that day." Harlan didn't answer. He was breathing hard, clutching his chest. Braxton read from the paper. "She looked at me, and then she looked at the empty chair where you would be sitting today, and she said, 'He believes he owns me. He believes he owns my daughter. He counts every penny he spends on us like he is buying cattle. If I give him $1, he will think he won. So I am leaving him exactly what he gave me emotionally." Braxton paused. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights in the hallway. And then she said, "You will get nothing." The words hung in the air, echoing the memory I had from the hallway, but now they carried the weight of a court order. "That is the same thing she said at the house," I whispered. I hadn't meant to speak out loud. Braxton looked at me and nodded. "Yes, she told me she had practiced saying it to him, but she needed to say it here, on the record, to make it permanent." Harlan slumped back in his chair. He looked deflated. The bluster was gone, replaced by a sullen, toxic shock. It won't stand, Harlan muttered. I will find a loophole. I will hire the best firm in Chicago. You can't cut a husband out. It is unnatural. Mr. Calloway, Braxton said, closing the folder with a sharp snap. You are the legal husband. That is true. But you are the legal husband of a woman who spent 30 years constructing a legal fortress specifically designed to keep you out. You can sue. You can spend your remaining fortune on legal fees, but I wrote this trust, and I do not make mistakes. He turned away from Harlan. He dismissed him completely, just as Harlan had dismissed me for decades. Braxton rotated his chair to face me. The shift was physical. He turned his back on the Callaways and created a private space for the two of us at the end of the table. Gemma, he said softly, there are a lot of signatures required to transfer the title of the assets. It is a process that will take a few weeks to fully execute. I looked at him, feeling dizzy. Mr. Braxton, I don't know what to do with $19 million. I don't even know how to pay for a lawyer to help me with this. The trust pays for your legal representation, he assured me, and for your tax advisors, and for your security, should you need it. He glanced over his shoulder at Trent, who was staring at me with a look that made my skin crawl. But before you sign anything, Braxton said, reaching into the bottom of the file, there is one more thing you need to see. The money is the headline, Gemma, but it is not the story. He slid a thick, bound binder toward me. It wasn't legal-sized. It looked like a scrapbook or a ledger. You grew up thinking you were alone, Braxton said. You told me once, when you came in to notarize your college loan papers, that you were proud of being self-made, that you survived despite your mother's weakness. I nodded, shame heating my cheeks. I did think that. Your mother wasn't weak. Gemma, she was underground. He tapped the binder. You need to look inside. You need to see how you were actually supported. Every time you got lucky, every time a door opened just a crack, you thought it was chance. It wasn't chance. It was Daphne. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the cover. Open it, Braxton urged gently. You have been fighting a war for 30 years. Gemma, it is time you saw the general who was commanding the troops from the shadows. I opened the binder. The first page wasn't a bank statement. It was an email printed out on plain white paper. The subject line read, Emergency Housing Grant, Anonymous Donor, and below it, a copy of a cashier's check made out to my first landlord in Chicago. My breath hitched. I turned the page. Another document, a receipt for a car repair bill from 5 years ago, paid by a benevolent association I had never heard of. I looked up at Braxton, tears blurring my vision. She was watching? I asked. She wasn't just watching, Braxton said. She was catching you, every single time. The leather binder lay open before me, a heavy, bound encyclopedia of a life I thought I had lived alone. The room was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system and the ragged breathing of Harlan Calloway, who sat across from me like a statue carved from salt. I turned the first page. It was not a bank statement. It was a photocopy of a flyer I had seen pinned to a corkboard in my high school guidance counselor's office 17 years ago. The North Star Initiative, a scholarship for first-generation independent students. I remembered staring at that flyer. I remembered writing the essay on a library computer, pouring my heart out about what it felt like to be a guest in my own home, about the silence at the dinner table, about the desire to build something that was mine. I had won $2,000 a semester. That money had bought my textbooks. It had paid for the bus pass that got me to my morning classes. I had framed the acceptance letter. I had looked at it every time I felt like quitting, telling myself that a committee of strangers saw potential in me even if my stepfather did not. I looked at the document underneath the flyer. It was a founding charter for the North Star Initiative. Sole donor, the DM, trust. She read the essay, Braxton said quietly. She told me it was the first time she really understood how much pain you were in. She couldn't hand you a check at the dinner table because Harlan checked the joint account balances every Friday. So she created a charity. She hired a board of directors just to approve one application. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. There were lease agreements. My first apartment in Chicago had been a studio above a bakery in a neighborhood that was just starting to turn expensive. The rent was $800 a month. I had negotiated it down to $600, or so I thought. I prided myself on that negotiation. I told my friends I was a shark. The paper in front of me was a correspondence between a property management firm and an anonymous LLC. Subject Tenant Subsidy, Unit 4B, Body. The remaining $200 of the monthly rent for Ms. Moore will be wired on the first of the month, as per the standing agreement. The tenant is to remain unaware of this subsidy to ensure her sense of independence remains intact. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly. It was a vertigo-inducing shift in perspective. I had walked through my 20s believing I was walking a tightrope without a net. I had looked down at the abyss and felt brave. Now I realized that the net had been there the whole time, woven from invisible wires, held by a woman who sat at home knitting scarves and nodding politely while her husband lectured her on the price of milk. "She wanted you to struggle," Braxton said, interpreting the look on my face. "But she didn't want you to drown. There is a difference." I kept turning the pages. The evidence was overwhelming. It was a mosaic of small, critical interventions. There was a receipt for dental surgery. I had needed a root canal when I was 24. I didn't have insurance. I had gone to a sliding scale clinic, expecting to lose the tooth. The dentist had told me that a local health grant had just cleared, allowing him to save the tooth and cap it. I remembered crying in the chair, thanking him. I should have been thanking her. There was a mechanic's invoice. The transmission on my Ford Focus had died 2 days before a major interview. I didn't have $1,200. I was going to cancel the interview. Then the garage called and said there was a customer loyalty rebate on parts that month. I paid $200. She had alerts set up, Braxton explained. She hired a private inquiry agent, a very discreet man, just to keep tabs on your major life events. When your car broke down, she knew within 3 hours. She called the garage directly, used a voice scrambler, and paid the difference via a prepaid debit card. I looked up at Harlan. He was staring at the documents upside down. His face a mixture of confusion and horror. He wasn't horrified by the money. He was horrified by the autonomy. "She didn't have a phone," Harlan whispered. It was a weak protest. "I checked the bill every month. She didn't have a cell phone." Braxton reached into the back pocket of the binder and pulled out a slim black device. It was an old flip phone, a model from 10 years ago. "She kept this taped to the underside of her vanity drawer," Braxton said. "She charged it when you were at the golf course. Harlan, she had a secure email server accessed only from the public library computers when she went to her book club meetings on Tuesdays." Harlan looked as if he might be sick. "The book club." "She read the books," Braxton said. "But she also managed a portfolio of high-yield municipal bonds and emerging tech stocks. She was an aggressive day trader, Mr. Calloway. While you were reading the Wall Street Journal and complaining about the market, she was beating it." I looked at the email printouts. They were not the letters of a submissive housewife. The language was sharp, decisive, and authoritative. "To J. Miller, senior broker, from DMM, sell the pharmaceutical holding. The FDA approval is stalling. Move 40% into logistics. The shipping sector is undervalued. Do it before the bell rings." "She was brilliant," I whispered. "I thought she was just Mom. I thought she liked gardening and quiet afternoons." "She did like those things," Braxton said. "But she treated her quiet life as a cover identity. She knew that if she showed any aptitude for business, Harlan would feel threatened. He would try to take over. He would try to manage her money. And if she showed any financial independence, he would cut you off completely just to punish her. So she played the role. She wore the beige cardigans. She asked for permission to buy a new blender. She made herself small so her capital could grow big. Bianca reached out and touched the edge of the binder. Her fingernails were perfectly manicured, a sharp contrast to the yellowing paper. "She lied to us," Bianca said. Her voice was trembling. Every day. She sat at breakfast and acted like she didn't know what a dividend was. She asked me to explain how Venmo worked last Thanksgiving. She was mocking us. She was protecting herself, I said. The words came out sharper than I intended. And she was protecting me. It is deceit, Trent spat. It is a violation of the marriage contract. You can't hide assets like that. Actually, you can, Braxton corrected him. As I stated, the trust was prenuptial. The growth of the assets is protected. Daphne paid her taxes. She just didn't pay the ego tax that Harlan required. I closed the binder. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just paper. It was a testament to a 30-year undercover operation. My mother hadn't just been a victim of Harlan's emotional neglect. She had been a resistance fighter operating behind enemy lines. I realized then that I wasn't crying. I expected to be sobbing. I expected to feel betrayed that she hadn't told me, that she had let me believe I was alone, but the tears didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, cold strength settling into my bones. It was the same strength I saw in her emails. I had built my life on the story that I was unwanted. I had worn my exclusion like a badge of honor. I don't need them. I used to say, I did this myself. And in a way, I had studied for the tests. I had worked the shifts. I had driven the car. But I hadn't done it in a vacuum. I had done it with a tailwind that I never felt because it was designed to be invisible. I wasn't alone, I said softly. No, Braxton said. You were never alone. You were just covertly supported. Harlan stood up. He looked shaky on his legs. He adjusted his tie, but the knot was crooked. This is all very touching, he sneered, trying to regain some ground. But a few receipts for car repairs don't prove anything. It proves she gave you pocket money. It doesn't prove the $19 million belongs to you. I will contest the will. I will contest the trust. I will prove she was mentally unstable. Paranoia is a symptom of dementia. You know, hiding phones, secret emails. That is not the behavior of a sane woman. Braxton didn't blink. He watched Harlan with the patience of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. I anticipated you would take that route. Harlan, the hysterical woman defense. It is a classic. Braxton swiveled his chair back to the main desk. He opened a small drawer and pulled out a digital audio recorder. It wasn't the cheap kind. It was professional grade, heavy and black. Daphne left one more thing, Braxton said. It is an addendum to the trust, a personal statement. She stipulated that this file was only to be played in the event that her husband or stepchildren threatened legal action to dispute the beneficiary. He placed the recorder in the center of the table. If you walk away now, Harlan, Braxton said, his hand hovering over the play button. If you sign the waiver and accept that the money is gone, this recording stays private. You can keep your reputation. You can tell your friends at the club that Daphne left everything to charity and you graciously supported her decision. Harlan laughed. It was a nervous, jagged sound. You are bluffing. What could she possibly say? She was a housewife. She was a mother, Braxton said. And she was an observer. Play it, Trent challenged. Let's hear the old lady ramble. Braxton looked at me. He was asking for my permission. I looked at the binder. I looked at the receipts that proved she had loved me every single day, even when she couldn't look me in the eye. I looked at Harlan, who was still trying to find a way to make himself the victim. Play it, I said. Braxton pressed the button. There was a hiss of static, and then the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. It was the sound of someone settling in. A breath was taken, and then her voice filled the room. It wasn't the voice I remembered from Sunday dinners, the soft, apologetic tone that asked if the roast was too dry. It wasn't the voice that whispered quick goodbyes when Harlan honked the horn in the driveway. It was the voice of the woman who wrote the emails. It was calm, it was deep, and it was absolutely fearless. My name is Daphne Moore, the recording began. And if you are hearing this, it means Harlan has decided that greed is more important than the truth. It means he is trying to take the one thing I kept safe from him. So I am going to tell you exactly why I stayed, and I am going to tell you exactly what he is. The digital recorder sat in the center of the mahogany table, like a black stone in a Zen garden, absorbing all the light in the room. Mr. Braxton did not look at me or the Callaways. He simply folded his hands and stared at the device as the magnetic hiss of the audio file settled into a clear, terrifyingly familiar sound. "Hello? Harlan?" my mother's voice said. It was not a ghostly whisper. It was not the dramatic, tear-choked confession of a dying woman. It was the voice she used when she was telling him that the plumber was coming on Tuesday, or that we were out of coffee filters. It was practical. It was domestic. And that mundane calmness made it the most violent thing I had ever heard. "If Elliot is playing this for you," the recording continued, "it means you have decided to do exactly what I knew you would do. You are trying to break the trust. You are trying to hurt Gemma." There was a pause on the tape. I could hear the background noise of her environment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant hum of the refrigerator. She had recorded this at the kitchen table, probably while we were all asleep. "I am recording this to explain why I stayed," she said, "because I know your vanity. Harlan, I know you will tell everyone that I was weak. You will tell Bianca and Trent that I was a simple woman who needed your guidance. You will rewrite history to make yourself the benevolent patriarch and me the helpless dependent." Harlan flinched. His jaw muscle jumped, a small spasm under the loose skin of his neck. "I did not stay because I needed you," my mother said. Her tone was conversational, almost bored. "I did not stay because I loved you. I stopped loving you in 1998, the day you told me that Gemma was too loud, too clumsy, and too much of a burden to take on the family vacation to the Cape. Do you remember that? You left her with a babysitter for 10 days? You told me it was for the best." I remembered that summer. I was 8. I spent 10 days eating macaroni and cheese and watching game shows, wondering why I wasn't good enough to see the ocean. "I stayed because I ran the numbers," Daphne said. "I consulted with Elliot. I looked at the divorce laws. I looked at your temperament. If I had left you then, you would have made it your life's mission to destroy me. You would have dragged us through court for a decade. You would have drained the Moore Trust in legal fees just to spite me. You would have used your connections in town to isolate us. You would have turned Gemma's life into a war zone." She took a breath. I could hear the intake of air, sharp and clear. "So I chose a different strategy. I chose to fight with time instead of lawyers. I decided to give you exactly what you wanted: a silent wife, a shadow. I let you win every argument about politics. I let you pick the restaurants. I let you believe you were the smartest person in the room. It was an exhausting performance, Harlan, but it was necessary. It bought Gemma a roof over her head. It bought her peace. It bought her a future where she could walk away from you without a scar on her credit score." Bianca let out a small, strangled sound. She looked at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. "And to Bianca and Trent," the voice shifted. It became softer, but no less firm. "I want you to know that I loved you. I truly did. I wiped your noses. I cheered for you at your games. I made your costumes. I did not give birth to you, but I mothered you to the best of my ability." Bianca looked down at her hands, her lower lip trembling. "But I also saw you," Daphne continued. "I saw how you looked at Gemma. I saw how you mimicked your father's cruelty. You learned early on that in the Callaway house, love is a limited resource, and to get your share, you had to push Gemma out of the circle. I do not blame you for surviving your father, but I could not allow you to inherit the weapon he used against my daughter." Trent slammed his hand on the table. "This is bullshit. She is manipulating us from the grave." "Quiet," Braxton said. He didn't even look up. "She isn't finished. I knew that when I died. Harlan would try to take the money," my mother said. "And I knew that Bianca and Trent, you would feel entitled to it. You would feel that because you are Callaways. You deserve everything, and Gemma deserves nothing. That is the lesson Harlan taught you." The voice on the tape hardened. It lost the kitchen table softness and became the voice of the investor, the woman who moved millions of dollars while her husband slept. "So, I have added a clause to the distribution schedule. Elliot calls it the anti-retaliation measure. I call it the manners clause. Braxton paused the recording. He looked at the three of them. Before we hear the rest, Braxton said, I should clarify the legal structure she is referring to. In addition to the main trust which goes to Gemma, Daphne left a secondary will. This will controls the distribution of her personal effects jewelry, furs, the small savings account Harlan knew about, and a goodwill fund of $250,000 intended for each of you. Bianca and Trent. Bianca's head snapped up. $250,000. Yes, Braxton said, a gesture of affection. However, the clause she is about to describe is binding. He pressed play. If you contest the trust, Daphne said, if you file a lawsuit against Gemma, if you slander her name, or if you attempt to delay the transfer of assets in any way, the goodwill fund is automatically dissolved. The money, along with my jewelry and personal effects, will be immediately transferred to the North Star Initiative to fund scholarships for students who do not have the safety net you have always taken for granted. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of greed colliding with a wall. $250,000 was not $19 million, but to Bianca and Trent, it was real money. It was a new car. It was a down payment. It was a lifeline. You have a choice, Daphne said. You can walk away with $250,000 and the memory of a stepmother who tried to be kind to you, or you can try to take Gemma's inheritance and lose everything. It is up to you. And Harlan, she said, addressing him one last time, you are probably red in the face right now. You are probably thinking that I stole this money from you, that I lived in your house and ate your food while hoarding a fortune. You are telling yourself that you are the victim. Harlan was indeed red in the face. He was gripping the arms of his chair so hard the leather was creaking. But remember this, she said. I paid for my own clothes with the dividends you never knew about. I paid for the groceries with the interest from the bonds you said were worthless. I did not take a single penny from you that I did not earn by being your maid, your cook, and your emotional punching bag for 30 years. Her voice dropped an octave. It was the deepest, most resonant I had ever heard it. You told me once that I would get nothing if I ever left you. You used that phrase like a leash, but today, I am returning it to you. I did not take from you. Harlan, I simply did not let you take from me. The recording ended with a soft click. The room felt different. The air was charged with a new kind of energy. For 30 years, the power dynamic in our family had been a monolith. Harlan was the god, and we were the subjects. Daphne had just taken a sledgehammer to the base of that statue. I sat back in my chair, feeling a sensation I couldn't quite name. It wasn't triumph. Triumph implies a battle won, and I hadn't fought this battle. My mother had fought it for me, silently, invisibly, while I was busy resenting her for being passive. I looked at the binder of receipts again. I realized then that my mother hadn't been weak. She hadn't been afraid. She had been the strongest person I would ever know. She had suppressed her own ego, her own pride, and her own voice for decades, just to ensure that when this moment came, the trap would spring perfectly. She didn't need Harlan to know she was smart. She didn't need the world to know she was wealthy. She only needed me to be safe. Her power wasn't in being recognized. It was in being effective. She can't do that, Bianca stammered. Tears were streaming down her face, but they were tears of frustration, not grief. She can't dangle money in front of us and then threaten to take it away. That is blackmail. It is a conditional bequest, Braxton corrected her. It is entirely legal. If you want the money, you simply have to respect her wishes. If you attack Gemma, you forfeit the gift. It is a very simple behavioral economic model. It is insulting, Trent yelled. He stood up and kicked his chair back. It clattered against the bookshelf. She leaves her own kids crumbs and gives the lottery to the stray and then tells us to be nice or we get zero. Who does she think she is? She thinks she is the woman who owns the assets, Braxton said calmly. And frankly, Trent, your reaction is precisely why she included the clause. Harlan had not spoken since the tape ended. He was staring at me. For years, Harlan had looked at me with a specific kind of gaze, a mixture of annoyance and indifference. He looked at me the way one looks at a stain on the carpet that won't quite come out. But now, as he raised his eyes to meet mine, that look was gone. In its place was something cold, sharp, and terrifyingly attentive. He was looking at me like I was a peer. He was looking at me like I was a rival. For the first time, he saw me not as Daphne's baggage, but as the holder of the checkbook. He saw the $19 million sitting behind my eyes. He didn't look defeated. He looked hungry. "You think this is over," Harlan said. His voice was low, a rumble in his chest. "You think because you have a tape recording and a clever lawyer, you have won." He stood up slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket. He smoothed his tie. He regained his composure with a terrifying speed. The shock had worn off, and the predator had returned. "Daphne was a housewife," Harlan said, dismissing the woman who had just outmaneuvered him from the grave. "She was easily influenced. And you? Gemma, you are a waitress at heart. You don't know how to hold on to money. You don't know how to fight a war." "I am not a waitress," I said, my voice steady. "And I am not my mother. I don't have to stay quiet to survive you anymore." Harlan smiled. It was the smile of a shark in bloody water. "We will see," he said. "The law is a very flexible thing, Gemma, and family is complicated." He turned to his children. "Come on," he commanded. "We are leaving." "But the money," Bianca sniffled, looking at Braxton. "The $250,000. "Forget the crumbs," Harlan snapped. "We are going for the bakery." He walked out of the room without looking back. Trent followed him, casting one last hateful glare in my direction. Bianca lingered for a second, looking at the binder on the table, then turned and hurried after her father, the sound of her heels clicking like gunshots in the hallway. The door closed. I was alone with Mr. Braxton and the silence. "They aren't going to take the goodwill money, are they?" I asked. "No," Braxton said, reaching out to turn off the recorder. "Harlan won't let them. It would be an admission of defeat. He is going to burn that bridge." "So what happens now?" Braxton looked at me. "Now," he said, "they go to a law firm that doesn't care about ethics. They will sue you. They will slander you. They will try to break you psychologically so you sign a settlement just to make it stop." He pushed the binder toward me. "But Daphne knew that, too. That is why she didn't just leave you money. Gemma, she left you ammunition." I touched the leather cover of the binder. I felt the ghost of my mother's hand in mine. "Let them come," I said, and for the first time in 36 years, I actually meant it. The war did not begin with a scream. It began with a man in a windbreaker knocking on the door of my apartment at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. He looked like a delivery driver, bored and underpaid. When I opened the door, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, he didn't say hello. He asked if I was Gemma Moore. I nodded. He shoved a thick envelope into my chest, muttered, "Have a nice day," and walked away before I could even grip the paper. I had been served. I sat on my couch and opened the packet. The header was embossed in heavy, intimidating black font sterling, Vance and Halloway. It sounded less like a law firm and more like a mercenary group. The language inside was not the calm, measured legalese of Mr. Braxton. It was a chainsaw. Plaintiff Harlan Calloway alleges that the defendant, Gemma Moore, engaged in a systematic and predatory campaign of undue influence over the deceased, Daphne Calloway. Allegations include manipulation of a mentally vulnerable elder, conspiracy to commit fraud, emotional extortion. They were accusing me of doing exactly what Harlan had done to my mother for 30 years. They claimed I had isolated her. They claimed I had poisoned her mind against her natural and loving family. They were demanding an immediate freeze of all trust assets, a forensic audit of my personal finances, and $5 million in punitive damages for emotional distress. I put the paper down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer breathtaking audacity of it. Harlan Calloway, a man who hadn't noticed my mother's favorite color in 3 decades, was now claiming emotional distress over her financial independence. My phone buzzed, then it buzzed again, and again. I picked it up. It was Instagram. Bianca had been busy. She hadn't named me directly. She was too smart for that. She had posted a black and white photo of herself and Trent as children. Sitting on my mother's lap, the caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive victimhood. "It is hard enough losing a mother," she wrote. "It is harder when you find out that a snake was living in the garden the whole time. Some people will smile in your face while they steal your legacy, heartbroken by the betrayal. Family first justice. For Daphne." The comments were already rolling in. Cousins I hadn't seen since Christmas of '98 were posting broken heart emojis. Aunts who used to pinch my cheek were commenting things like, "Disgusting behavior and karma never misses." I felt a wave of nausea. They were rewriting the story in real time, in their version. I wasn't the stepdaughter who was ignored. I was the villain who had infiltrated the palace. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I remembered my mother's voice on the tape I fought with time. I called Mr. Braxton. "They have filed," I said. "I have the copy," Braxton replied. His voice was unbothered, as if he were discussing the weather. "Sterling and Vance. They are expensive. They are loud. And they are predictable. This is the shock and awe phase. Gemma, they want you to panic." "They are destroying my reputation," I said. "Bianca is painting me as a thief online." "Let her paint," Braxton said. "Screenshots are admissible evidence. Every lie she tells now is a nail in her own coffin later. But you need your own representation for the litigation. I am a trust attorney. You need a litigator. I have taken the liberty of setting up a meeting with Sarah Jenkins." I met Sarah 2 hours later. She did not have a mahogany office. She worked out of a glass-walled building in the tech district. She was 40 years old, wore a sharp blazer, and didn't offer me coffee. "I read the file," Sarah said, tapping a stylus against her tablet. "Harlan Calloway is a bully. Bullying works on 90% of the population. My job is to make sure you are in the 10%. She looked me in the eye. "First rule," she said, "no direct contact. Block their numbers. Block their social media. If they come to your house, you call the police. If they send you a letter, you burn it after you send me a copy. We speak only in writing. We speak only through the court. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. "Good, because they are going to try to break you before we even get to a judge." She was right. The pressure didn't stop with the lawsuit. 2 days later, I was walking to my car after my shift at the graphic design agency. The parking garage was dim, the air smelling of gasoline and damp concrete. "Gemma." I froze. Trent was leaning against the hood of my Honda. He was wearing a polo shirt and khakis, looking like he had just come from a yacht club mixer. He had a smile on his face, but his eyes were flat. "Trent," I said, gripping my keys, "my lawyer said I shouldn't talk to you." "Lawyers complicate things," Trent said, pushing himself off the car. He took a step toward me. He didn't look aggressive, but he was big, and he was taking up all the space between me and the door. "Look, Dad is intense. You know that. He is on the warpath. He is talking about hiring private investigators to dig into your past, your ex-boyfriends, your job history, every mistake you ever made." He sighed, shaking his head as if he were trying to save me from a burning building. "I don't want that for you, Gem. I really don't. You are family, in a way." "What do you want, Trent?" "I think we can settle this," he said, lowering his voice. "Without the lawyers, without the embarrassment, Dad just wants what is fair. Half. You keep 10 million. We take 10 million. We drop the suit. Bianca takes down the posts. Everyone walks away happy." $10 million. He said it so casually. "And if I say no?" I asked. Trent's smile didn't fade, but it changed. It became tighter. "Then this gets ugly," he said. Dad won't stop. He will drag this out for 5 years. He will drain that trust dry with legal fees. You will end up with nothing anyway. But you will be miserable the whole time. Don't be stupid. Gemma, take the deal. I looked at him, really looked at him, for years. I had been afraid of Trent. I had been afraid of his sneer, afraid of his dismissal. But standing there in the parking garage, I didn't see a powerful heir. I saw a man who was terrified of having to work for a living. Send the offer in writing to Ms. Jenkins, I said. Trent blinked. What? If it is a serious offer, I said, unlocking my car. Put it on letterhead, sign it, and send it to my attorney. You are making a mistake, Trent hissed. The nice guy mask slipped. You are a nobody, Gemma. You think that money makes you one of us? You are just the help that got lucky. Get off my car, Trent, I said. He stared at me for a long second, then stepped back, spitting on the ground near my tire before walking away. I got into my car and locked the doors. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. But I realized something. Trent hadn't come here because he was strong. He had come here because he was desperate. If their case was so solid, they wouldn't be offering to split the pot. That night, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in instinct maybe made me pick up. Hello? Is this Gemma? A woman's voice. Smoky? Older? Who is this? This is Lana, Harlan's cousin, from Milwaukee. I vaguely remembered Lana. She was the black sheep of the Calloway family. She had been banned from Thanksgiving dinners years ago for getting drunk and telling Harlan he was a pompous windbag. What do you want? Lana. I saw Bianca's post, Lana said. She sounded like she was smoking a cigarette. Little witch. Listen, honey, I don't care about you, and I certainly don't care about Harlan, but I know you are sitting on a pile of Daphne's cash. I am hanging up, I said. Wait, she snapped. I have information, about Harlan's business, about the books. I paused. What about them? Information costs money, Lana said. $5,000, cash, in a brown bag. I will meet you at the diner on State Street. I am not bribing you, I said. It is not a bribe. It is a consultation fee. She laughed, a dry hacking sound. Harlan is broke, honey. I mean, really broke. Why do you think he is suing you so hard? He isn't fighting for honor. He is fighting because the sharks are circling his boat. I know where he buried the debt. You want to win? You need to know where the bodies are. I felt a chill. Call my lawyer, I said. If the information is real, she will pay you for a deposition, legally. Fine, Lana grumbled. But tell her to hurry. Harlan is trying to liquidate assets that don't belong to him. She hung up. I sat in the dark of my kitchen. The united front of the Calloway family was crumbling. They weren't a dynasty. They were a pack of wolves turning on each other the moment the food ran out. I met with Sarah and Braxton the next morning. I told them about Trent. I told them about Lana. Desperation, Braxton said, nodding. It confirms the timeline. What timeline? I asked. Braxton placed a new document on the desk. It wasn't from the original binder. It was fresh, retrieved from a secure archive just that morning. When your mother set up the trust, Braxton said. She didn't just invest in stocks. She invested in debt. I don't understand, I said. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Gemma, your mother was a genius, an absolute, cold-blooded genius. She opened the document. It was a promissory note, a loan agreement. 6 years ago, Braxton explained, Harlan's company, Calloway Logistics, was in deep trouble. He needed a massive injection of capital to avoid bankruptcy. He couldn't get it from a bank because his credit was already overextended. So he went to a private lender, a shell company called Aurora Holdings. Aurora, I whispered. That was the name of the street we lived on before he married Mom. Exactly, Braxton smiled. Harlan didn't catch the reference. He was too desperate. He borrowed $3 million from Aurora Holdings. He signed over a lien on his business assets as collateral. He has been paying interest on it for years, but the principal is coming due next month. And Aurora Holdings? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Aurora Holdings is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Daphne Moore Trust, Braxton said. Your mother didn't just leave you money, Gemma. She left you the mortgage on Harlan's life. He doesn't know. He has no idea, Sarah said. He thinks he owes money to some faceless investment group in Delaware. He doesn't know that the person holding the leash is the stepdaughter he just sued for $5 million. I looked at the paper. It was a weapon, a nuclear weapon. So, Sarah said, interlacing her fingers, if he proceeds with this lawsuit, if he tries to freeze your assets, we have the right to call in the loan, immediately. If he can't pay, and we know he can't, the trust forecloses on his business. You wouldn't just win the lawsuit, Gemma. You would own Callaway Logistics. I sat back. The room seemed to spin. All those years. Harlan had walked around the house like a king. He had treated my mother like a servant. He had treated me like a ghost. And all the while, my mother had owned the paper that kept his empire from collapsing. She had held his fate in her knitting bag. He called me a thief, I said softly. He did, Braxton agreed. He said, I get nothing. He did. I looked at the promissory note. I looked at the signature at the bottom, Harlan's flamboyant, arrogant scrawl. He is suing me to get the money to pay me. I realized. He needs my inheritance to pay off the debt he owes to my trust. Irony is a beautiful thing, Sarah noted. What do we do? I asked. Sarah smiled. It was a smile that would have terrified Trent. We don't do anything yet, she said. We let him scream. We let him file his motions. We let him spend money he doesn't have on lawyers. We wait until he is standing in front of a judge, swearing on a Bible that he is the victim, and then, she tapped the paper, then we pull the rug. I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. Bianca had posted a video this time. She was crying, talking about how some people have no conscience. I didn't feel sick anymore. I didn't feel afraid. I put my phone in my pocket. I walked to the subway. I had a shift at the design agency in an hour. I was going to go to work. I was going to do my job. And I was going to wait. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one running out of time. Harlan was. The forensic accounting report hit the glass table of Sarah Jenkins' conference room with a heavy, satisfying thud. It was thick, bound in clear plastic, and filled with the kind of colorful pie charts that usually indicate corporate synergy. But these charts indicated something else entirely. They indicated a catastrophe. He is not just broke, Sarah said, leaning back in her ergonomic chair with a look of predatory satisfaction. He is underwater, deep underwater. We are talking Mariana Trench levels of debt. I picked up the report. I had spent my entire life looking at Harlan Callaway as if he were a monument to capitalism. He was the man in the silk suits. He was the man who leased a new Cadillac every September. He was the man who lectured me on fiscal responsibility while sipping scotch that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. How? I asked. He has the logistics company, the real estate. Smoke and mirrors, Sarah said. Callaway Logistics has been bleeding cash for 7 years. The shipping contracts dried up when the big distribution hubs moved to Amazon. He didn't pivot. He just kept borrowing to maintain appearances. Mr. Braxton, who was sitting quietly by the window cleaning his spectacles, chimed in. Vanity is an expensive hobby. Gemma, Harlan couldn't bear to downsize. He couldn't sell the lake house or the big colonial on Elm Street because that would be admitting failure. So, he leveraged everything. He refinanced the house 3 times. He took out business lines of credit to pay for personal vacations. I turned the page of the report. The numbers were staggering. He owed millions to banks, to vendors, and to the IRS. But here's the interesting part, Sarah said, tapping a section highlighted in yellow. For the last 5 years, Just as the company was about to miss payroll or default on a loan, there would be an infusion of cash, always just enough to keep the lights on, always categorized as private equity injection or consulting fees. Where did it come from? I asked. Braxton stopped cleaning his glasses. He looked at me with that familiar mix of sadness and pride. It came from Daphne, he said. I froze. My mother gave him money, but she said she didn't. She didn't give it to him, Braxton corrected. She invested it, through the blind trust structure. She used a series of shell companies completely legal, but completely opaque to purchase equity in his failing business. When he was desperate, he would sell a piece of the company to a faceless investor. That investor was his wife. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest. I thought about all the times my mother had sat at the dinner table, wearing her old clothes, eating the smallest portion of chicken, while Harlan bragged about his business acumen. She had been sitting there, silently funding his ego, paying for the very roof he threatened to kick me out of. Why? I whispered. Why would she save him? Because if his company failed, the house would be seized, Braxton said. And if the house was seized, your life would have been disrupted. You were still in college, or just starting out. She needed the environment to remain stable so you could launch. She wasn't saving Harlan. Gemma. She was maintaining the habitat for your sake. She was paying rent, Sarah added bluntly. She was paying millions of dollars in rent to keep a roof over your head without having to fight a custody battle or a divorce war. I looked at the ledger again. It was the ultimate act of silent endurance. She had propped up his masculinity with her checkbook, allowing him to feel powerful while she held the actual deed to his throne. And that brings us to the leverage, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, because Daphne didn't just buy equity, she bought debt. She flipped to the back of the binder. This is the promissory note we discussed earlier, but now we have the full context. 2 years ago, Harlan's primary lender threatened to foreclose on the warehouse district. It would have killed the business. Daphne's trust stepped in again, through the Aurora Holdings entity, and bought the debt from the bank at 80 cents on the dollar. So he owes the money to Aurora Holdings, I said. Yes, Sarah smiled. And since the trust is now active, and you are the sole beneficiary, you are Aurora Holdings. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just the stepdaughter he was trying to disinherit, I was his banker. This changes everything, Sarah said. He is suing you for the inheritance, but if he pushes this lawsuit, if he causes undue strain on the trust's assets, the trust has a fiduciary duty to liquidate risky holdings to protect the principal, and right now, the riskiest holding is the debt of Callaway Logistics. Meaning, Braxton said softly, if he doesn't drop the lawsuit, we can call the loan. We can demand immediate repayment of $3 million. He doesn't have it. We would foreclose on his business, his warehouse, and likely, due to personal guarantees he signed, the house on Elm Street. We could take the house? I asked. You could take everything, Sarah said, not out of revenge, but simply because he forced your hand. It is the ultimate poison pill defense. If he bites you, he dies. I sat in silence for a long moment. I thought about Bianca and Trent. They were walking around town acting like royalty, posting on Instagram about betrayal, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was held up by my mother's patience. Does he know? I asked. Not yet, Sarah said, but the auditors are crawling through his books right now for the discovery phase of the lawsuit. He is about to find out that his silent partner is the daughter he calls a mistake. The cracks began to show 3 days later. It started with a frantic text from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be an old friend of Bianca's who had always been kind to me. She told me that Bianca had been trying to sell her designer handbags on a resale site in bulk. Then came the rumor from the country club, relayed by Mr. Braxton's secretary. Harlan had been declined credit at the pro shop, a small thing, but in their world, it was like a bell tolling. But the real fracture happened between the siblings. I heard about it from the discovery logs. Our team had subpoenaed their communications. Trent had sent a furious email to his father, demanding to know why his credit card had been declined at a restaurant in Chicago. Harlan's reply had been vague, blaming banking errors. Trent wasn't buying it. He had replied, "Bianca says Mom had money. You said you had money. Why are we bouncing checks while Gemma is sitting on 20 million? What aren't you telling us?" Dad. They were starting to smell the rot. They were realizing that the hatred they felt for me was the only inheritance they were actually going to get. Then, the phone call came. It was Friday afternoon. I was at work, staring at a layout for a brochure, when my cell phone rang. It wasn't a blocked number. It was Harlan's personal cell. I let it ring 3 times. My instinct was to throw the phone across the room, but Sarah had told me that if he reached out, I could answer as long as I didn't agree to anything legal. "Let him talk," she had said. "Let him dig." I picked up. "Hello?" "Gemma," Harlan said. His voice was unrecognizable. The booming, authoritative baritone was gone. In its place was a soft, almost wheedling tone, the voice of a car salesman trying to close a deal on a lemon. "I hope I'm not disturbing you at work," he said. He had never in my life cared if he disturbed me. He used to vacuum the hallway at 6 in the morning on Saturdays just to wake me up. "What do you want?" "Harlan, I think things have gotten out of hand." He sighed. "Lawyers, they escalate things. They feed on conflict. It is what they do. I have been thinking about your mother, about what she would want." I almost laughed. "You are suing me for $5 million. Harlan, I think we are past what Mom would want." "That is just procedural," he said quickly. "Standard filings. Look, Gemma, you are family. We have had our differences. Sure, I was hard on you. I admit that. I wanted you to be tough. And look at you now. You are tough." He was rewriting history again. He wasn't hard on me to make me tough. He was hard on me because he wanted me to break. "I want to meet," he said. "Just us. No lawyers. No court reporters. Just a father and his daughter sitting down to work this out. We can come to an arrangement that makes everyone happy. You don't want to see the family destroyed, do you?" There it was. The guilt trip. The assumption that I, the woman, the peacemaker, would naturally sacrifice myself to keep the family intact. I looked at the sticky note on my monitor where I had written, "You are Aurora Holdings." "I will meet you," I said. "Wonderful," he breathed. "Come to the house. We can have dinner." "No," I said. "I will meet you at the Grind on 4th Street, tomorrow at 10 in the morning. The coffee shop." He sounded offended. "It is a bit public, isn't it? Take it or leave it. Harlan," he paused. I could hear him grinding his teeth. "Fine, 10 o'clock. I arrived at 9:45. I bought a black coffee and sat at a table in the back, facing the door. The Grind was busy, filled with students and hipsters. It was loud, chaotic, and real. It was everything Harlan hated. He walked in at 10 sharp. He was wearing a camel hair coat and sunglasses, looking like a celebrity trying to avoid the paparazzi. He scanned the room with a look of distaste before spotting me. He walked over, pulling out the metal chair with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Gemma," he nodded. "You look well." "I am tired." "Harlan," I said. "So let's skip the small talk. Why are we here?" He took off his sunglasses and folded them on the table. His eyes were bloodshot. There were bags under them that no amount of concealer could hide. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "I am here to offer you a way out," he said benevolently. "A way out of what?" "Out of the mess," he said. "The litigation, the publicity, Bianca's posts. I can make them stop. You know, I can call off the dogs." He reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out a white flag. He pulled out a blue legal folder. "I had my team draw up a settlement agreement," he said, sliding it across the sticky table. "It is very generous." I didn't open it. "Tell me what it says." "It says that we agree to invalidate the current trust due to technical errors," he said smoothly. "And in exchange, I will voluntarily set up a new trust for you. $2 million. Cash. Tax-free. You walk away with $2 million. Gemma, that is more money than you could earn in 10 lifetimes at your little design job. And the other $17 million, I asked. It returns to the marital estate, he said, spreading his hands. Where it belongs, to pay off the debts, to secure the family legacy. It is the right thing to do. He looked at me with that same expectant gaze he used to have when he told me to clean my room. He expected obedience. He expected me to be so dazzled by the number 2 million and so terrified of his anger that I would sign. You brought a contract to a coffee date, I said. I like to be prepared. You didn't come here to talk, I said, my voice rising just enough to be heard by the student at the next table. You came here to rob me. Again. Keep your voice down, he hissed. I am offering you a fortune. You are being ungrateful. Again. Ungrateful! I looked at him. Harlan, I know about the debt. He froze. His hand, which had been resting on the folder, twitched. I don't know what you are talking about. I know about Callaway Logistics, I said. I know about the $3 million loan coming due next month. I know you are insolvent. You aren't trying to get the inheritance to secure the legacy. You are trying to get it because you are drowning. His face went pale, then red. The mask of the benevolent father dropped, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. You don't know anything about business, he spat. You are just a girl who got lucky because your mother was a sneak. My mother was the only reason you still have a business, I said. And here's the reality. Harlan, I haven't signed your settlement, which means I am still the beneficiary. And do you know who owns your debt? He stared at me. He didn't speak, but I saw the realization dawn in his eyes. It was a slow, horrifying sunrise. Who? He whispered. I do. I said. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stated the fact. Aurora Holdings is an asset of the Daphne Moore Trust, I said. I own your loan. Harlan, I am your creditor. He looked at the folder under his hand. He looked at me. For the first time, he realized that the person sitting across from him wasn't a signature waiting to happen. I was the bank. You wouldn't, he stammered. You wouldn't call it in. It would destroy the family. You already destroyed the family, I said. You destroyed it when you told a 5-year-old girl she was nothing. I stood up. I didn't take the folder. I left it there on the table, right next to his cold cup of coffee. You have 24 hours to drop the lawsuit, I said, and tell Bianca to delete her account. If you don't, well, I guess we will see how business really works. I walked out of the coffee shop. The air outside was crisp and cold. My hands were shaking, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline of finally, after 30 years, standing up. I didn't look back, but I knew he was still sitting there, staring at the empty chair, realizing that the nothing he had promised me had turned out to be everything he needed to survive. And I held it all. The morning of the preliminary hearing. The sky over Madison was the color of a bruised plum. It was raining. A cold, miserable drizzle that turned the city gray. I arrived at the Dane County Courthouse 20 minutes early, my umbrella fighting a losing battle against the wind. Sarah Jenkins walked beside me, her heels clicking on the wet pavement with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. We found them in the atrium. Harlan, Bianca, and Trent were standing near the metal detectors, huddled together like a government in exile. Harlan saw me instantly. He said something to his children, patted Trent on the shoulder, and then walked toward me. He didn't look like the man who had been cornered in a coffee shop 48 hours ago. He looked composed, polished, and terrifyingly paternal. Gemma, he said, stopping just outside the range of my umbrella. He ignored Sarah completely. Can we have a moment, just family? Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my counsel, I said. My voice was steady, but my pulse was thumping against my collarbone. Harlan sighed, a long, weary exhalation that was meant to signal disappointment. He looked at me with sad, watery eyes. "I know things were heated the other day," he said softly. "I was in shock. We all were. But I have had time to think. Gemma, I have been thinking about your mother, about the sanctity of this family." He took a half step closer. "We don't need a judge to tell us who we are," he continued. "I want to propose a fair division, not the 2 million I mentioned before, a true split. We take the assets, we liquidate the holdings, and we divide it into 4 equal shares. You, me, Bianca, Trent. It is logical. It is what Daphne would have wanted if she hadn't been confused." He was good. I had to give him that. He almost sounded sincere. He almost sounded like a father trying to keep his children from tearing each other apart. But I wasn't listening to the melody anymore. I was reading the sheet music. I looked him dead in the eye. "You are not offering a split because you want fairness. Harlan," I said, "you are offering it because the quarterly audit on Callaway Logistics is due on the 15th of next month, and when the bank sees your liquidity ratio, they are going to pull the plug." Harlan's left eye twitched. It was a micro-expression, a tiny short circuit in his mask. He breathed in sharply. "That is private business information," he hissed, his voice dropping the paternal act instantly. "It is not private," I corrected him. "It is my business. I own your debt. Remember, you need the settlement money to pay me back. You are trying to pay me with my own money. Harlan." He stared at me, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. The repentant father had vanished. The man standing there was just a debtor looking at a foreclosure notice. "See you inside," I said. The courtroom was wood-paneled and smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. The Honorable Judge Holloway sat on the bench. A woman with gray hair cut in a severe bob and a face that suggested she had heard every lie ever invented. Harlan's legal team, Sterling and Vance, started their opening arguments with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Their lead attorney, a man with a tan that looked painted on, paced the floor, gesturing wildly. "Your Honor," he boomed, "we are here to correct a tragedy. Daphne Callaway was a devoted wife, a simple homemaker who trusted her husband implicitly. But in her later years, as her faculties declined, she fell under the spell of a complex financial instrument she could not possibly have understood. We intend to prove that the deceased was subject to undue influence, that she was manipulated into hiding assets, and that the resulting trust is a product of fraud, not intent." I sat at the defendant's table, watching Harlan. He was nodding solemnly, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. Bianca was looking at the floor. Trent was staring at the back of my head, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. "They are painting her as a victim," I whispered to Sarah. "Standard playbook," Sarah whispered back, not looking up from her notes. "Wait for the cross." When it was our turn, Sarah didn't make a speech. She called witnesses. The first was Mr. Arthur Pendergast. He was a small, nervous man who had been a junior broker at the investment firm my mother used for 20 years. He walked to the stand, adjusted the microphone, and looked terrified until Sarah asked him about Daphne. "Mrs. Callaway?" Pendergast smiled. "Oh, she was sharp. Scarily sharp." "Can you elaborate?" Sarah asked. "Mr. Callaway alleges that his wife was confused by financial matters. Did you find that to be the case?" "Confused?" Pendergast laughed. "Your Honor, Mrs. Callaway corrected my math on yield curves 3 times in one meeting. She predicted the housing crash of 2008 6 months before it happened. She shorted the market while the rest of our clients were losing their shirts. She wasn't confused. She was the one giving the orders. I just executed the trades." Harlan shifted in his seat. The narrative of the simple housewife was taking a hit. Next came Mrs. Higgins, the notary clerk who had witnessed the signing of the original trust documents. She was a stern woman who looked like a librarian who didn't tolerate whispering. "Was Mrs. Callaway under duress when she signed the papers?" Sarah asked. "Absolutely not," Mrs. Higgins stated. "She was calm. She asked Mr. Braxton specific questions about the irrevocability clauses. She joked that she needed a lock that even a locksmith couldn't pick. She was the most lucid client I have seen in 30 years. The lawyer from Sterling and Vance tried to object, claiming this was anecdotal, but the judge waved him down. Then, Sarah played her ace. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "we would like to submit into evidence a document we refer to as Exhibit C. It is a notarized protocol drafted by the deceased, Daphne Calloway. 5 years ago, she handed a file to the bailiff, who took it to the judge. The judge put on her reading glasses. The room went silent. "What is this?" the judge asked, her eyebrows raising. "It is a script, Your Honor." Sarah said, "Mrs. Calloway predicted that her husband would sue. She predicted the exact arguments he would use. She predicted he would claim she was mentally unstable, and she wrote a rebuttal to those arguments, to be read in this court." Sarah picked up her copy and began to read. "Item 1, Sarah read, "Harlan will claim I did not understand the trust. Response: I wrote the initial draft of the trust myself on a legal pad in 1992. Before I even met Mr. Braxton. The structure is mine." Sarah looked at Harlan. He was pale. "Item 2, she continued. "Harlan will claim I was influenced by Gemma. Response: Gemma does not know the money exists. I have kept her in the dark specifically so she could learn to stand on her own feet. The decision to give it to her is mine alone, based on the observation that she is the only member of this family who knows how to work for a living." "Objection," Harlan's lawyer shouted. "This is hearsay. The deceased is not here to be cross-examined." "It is a notarized affidavit," the judge said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "It is admissible, overruled." Sarah read the final point. "Item 3. Harlan will claim he provided for me. Response: I have paid the property taxes on the Elm Street house from my private account since 2005. I have paid for his country club membership dues for the last decade under the guise of household savings. I did not live off him. He lived off me." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the sound of a balloon popping in slow motion. I looked at Bianca. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at her father. Her expression wasn't one of anger, but of dawning horror. She was realizing that the luxury she had grown up in, the superiority she had felt over me, was a lie funded by the very woman she had despised. "He lied." I saw Bianca mouth the words. She didn't say it out loud, but I saw it. Trent, however, was not having a revelation. He was having a meltdown. He leaned over and whispered furiously into Harlan's ear. Harlan shoved him away. The judge took off her glasses and looked at Harlan's legal team. "Counsel," she said, her voice dangerously low, "I have heard testimony from financial experts. I have seen documents that suggest Mrs. Calloway was a sophisticated investor, and I have an affidavit that essentially predicts your entire case. This is beginning to look less like a probate dispute and more like a frivolous attempt to harass the beneficiary." She leaned forward. "If you continue down this road of arguing mental incompetence without a shred of medical evidence, I will not only dismiss this case, but I will also consider sanctions against your firm for wasting the court's time, and I will award full legal fees to the defendant." Harlan's lawyer gulped. "Your Honor, we request a recess to consult with our client." "You have 1 hour," the judge said. Bang. The gavel hit the wood. We walked out into the hallway. I felt lightheaded. It was working. My mother's plan was working. It was like she was in the room, directing the play from behind the curtain. "They are going to fold," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Harlan can't afford the legal fees if the judge sanctions him. He is tapped out." "It felt too easy," I said. "Harlan doesn't give up. He destroys." "He is cornered. Gemma, rats don't fight when they are cornered. They run." Sarah was wrong. Rats don't run when they are cornered. They bite. We were standing near the water fountain when a young man in a cheap suit walked up to us. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a process server. "Gemma Moore?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me a large manila envelope. "Courtesy service. Emergency filing." Sarah snatched the envelope from my hand and ripped it open. She scanned the document, and her face, usually so composed, went rigid. "What is it?" I asked. "It is Trent," she said. "He didn't sign the settlement. He went rogue." "What did he do?" "He filed an emergency ex parte motion," Sarah said. Reading rapidly, "He is claiming that because the trust assets are in dispute, and because the investigation into the fraud is ongoing, all assets connected to the trust must be frozen immediately to prevent dissipation. He is asking for a complete lockout." "But the judge just warned them," I said. "This isn't about the will," Sarah said. "This is a civil tort. He is claiming you stole intellectual property from the family business to manipulate the stock market. It is insane, but it buys them time. It freezes the accounts until a hearing can be set. That could be weeks." "I can wait weeks," I said. "I have my job." Sarah looked at the second page of the document. She looked up at me, and her eyes were full of genuine concern. "Gemma," she said, "there is an eviction notice attached. Eviction, I pay my rent. My landlord loves me." "Your landlord is a holding company called Blue Spruce Properties," Sarah said. "Does that sound familiar?" I shook my head. "Blue Spruce is a subsidiary of the trust," Sarah said. "Your mother bought your apartment building 4 years ago. She has been your landlord," I gasped. "She bought the building." "Yes, to keep your rent stable, but because the building is a trust asset, and Trent has just filed a motion claiming the trust is fraudulent." She held up the paper. "He is petitioning to have the unauthorized occupant removed from the disputed asset to preserve its value. He is evicting you from your own home. Gemma, he is giving you 48 hours to vacate." I looked across the hallway. Trent was standing by the window, smoking a vape pen, which was illegal inside the courthouse. He saw me looking at him. He didn't smile. He didn't look angry. He looked smug. He raised his hand and mimicked a little wave, a goodbye wave. He knew he couldn't win the money. So he had decided to take the one thing he knew matters more to me than cash. He was taking my sanctuary. He was putting me on the street. "Can he do this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Technically," Sarah grimaced. "If the judge grants the temporary freeze, yes, he is arguing that you are living rent-free in a family asset and degrading its value. It is a dirty, dirty move." "He wants to make me homeless," I said. "He wants to break me." "He wants you to trade," Braxton said, stepping up beside us. "He wants you to trade the eviction for the settlement. He is holding your home hostage." I looked at the eviction notice. Vacate the premises by 5 in the afternoon on Friday. I felt a surge of panic. The old, familiar feeling of being the unwanted child, the one without a room, without a seat at the table. It washed over me, cold and suffocating. But then I remembered the coffee shop. I remembered the ledger. I remembered that I was not the child anymore. "He wants a fight," I said, taking the paper from Sarah. "He thinks I'm going to beg." "We can file a counter motion," Sarah said, "but it will take time." "No," I said. "Let him freeze the accounts. Let him try to kick me out." I looked at Trent one last time. "He forgot one thing," I said. "What?" Braxton asked. "He forgot who holds the mortgage on his house." I said, "If he wants to play landlord, fine, but he is playing on my board now." I turned to Sarah. "Call the bank," I said. "Call in the loan on Callaway Logistics. Today, right now." "Gemma," Sarah warned, "that is the nuclear option. If you do that, there is no going back. You will bankrupt the company. You will bankrupt your father." "They just tried to make me homeless." "Sarah," I said, walking toward the exit, "I am done being the one who moves over." I pushed open the heavy courthouse doors and stepped out into the rain. It was still cold. It was still gray, but I didn't feel the chill anymore. I felt the heat of the bridge I was about to burn. The adrenaline that had propelled me out of the courthouse and into the rain evaporated the moment I sat down in Sarah's office. In its place came the cold, trembling reality of the math. I sat in the leather chair, staring at the banking app on my phone. "I have $1,240, I said. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the room. That is my checking account. My savings has 3,000. If the judge grants Trent's motion to freeze the trust assets, I can't pay you. I can't pay the filing fees. I can't pay for the forensic accountant. I looked up at Sarah. She was pacing the room, but she stopped and looked at me with a hardness that I needed. We work on contingency for the civil suit, she reminded me. But the defense fees, I asked. The daily costs. If they drag this out for 6 months, Sarah, I will be bankrupt. I won't just lose the house. I will lose my ability to fight back. They don't have to win the case. They just have to starve me out. It was the oldest trick in the book. It was how rich men beat poor women. They buried them in paper until they couldn't afford to breathe. Stop, Mr. Braxton said. He was standing by the window, looking at a physical map of Madison he had unrolled on the sidebar. He wasn't looking at the financial projections. He was looking at the property lines. You are spiraling. Gemma, that is exactly what Trent wants. He filed that eviction notice to induce panic. He wants you to call him and beg for a deal. He is kicking me out of my home, I snapped. Panic is a reasonable response. He isn't kicking you out of anything, Braxton said calmly. He turned around, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. Trent went to law school, I believe, but he clearly slept through his classes on corporate structure. He tapped the map. The eviction notice names the plaintiff as the estate of Daphne Moore. It claims that the estate is reclaiming its property. Right, I said. And the estate owns my building. You told me that. No, Braxton corrected. I told you the estate owns Blue Spruce Properties. He walked over to the table and opened the massive binder, flipping to a section I hadn't read yet. Your mother didn't just buy the building. Gemma. She incorporated it. Blue Spruce Properties is a limited liability company. The trust is the sole shareholder. Yes, but the manager of the LLC, the only person with the legal authority to sign leases, order repairs, or issue eviction notices, is an independent party appointed for a 10-year term. I looked at the document. Who is the manager? I asked. Braxton pointed a thumb at his own chest. I am, and I assure you, I have no intention of evicting my favorite tenant. But if the judge freezes the trust? The freeze applies to the trust's liquid assets. Sarah jumped in, catching on. It prevents the trust from spending money. It does not dissolve the existing contracts of its subsidiaries. Blue Spruce is a separate legal entity. Until a court orders the dissolution of the LLC, which would take years, Braxton is the boss. Trent has no standing. He is trying to evict you from a house he doesn't own, using authority he doesn't have. I felt the air rush back into my lungs. So it is a bluff. It is a sloppy bluff, Braxton said, and we are going to use it. Sarah sat down at her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I am drafting a motion to dismiss the eviction and a motion for sanctions against Trent for filing a frivolous claim. But we need to hit them harder. We need to make sure they are too busy putting out their own fires to light any more under you. The audit? I said. The loan? Bigger, Sarah said. She pulled up a new file on the screen. It was the result of the deep dive investigation into Harlan's collateral. We knew Harlan was double-dipping, Sarah said. We knew he borrowed from the trust to pay the bank, but look at this. She spun the monitor around. It was a list of assets pledged as collateral for the Aurora Holdings loan. Warehouse B, 1400 Industrial Parkway. Fleet vehicles, trucks 40 through 55. Okay, I said. He pledged the trucks. Now look at this. Sarah clicked a second window. It was a UCC filing a public record of collateral pledged to a commercial bank in Chicago 3 months after he signed the deal with my mother. Collateral Warehouse B, 1400 Industrial Parkway. Fleet vehicles, trucks, 40 through 55. He pledged the same assets twice, I whispered. That is fraud, Braxton said, his voice heavy with disapproval. It is bank fraud. It is wire fraud. And because he signed an affidavit to the bank stating the assets were unencumbered, it is perjury. If the bank finds out, Sarah said. They call the loan immediately, and they call the district attorney. And if the trust finds out? I asked. The trust, Braxton said, has a fiduciary duty to report criminal activity involving its collateral. If we submit this to the court, Gemma, Harlan doesn't just lose his business, he goes to prison. I stared at the screen. Prison. I had wanted to beat him. I had wanted him to acknowledge me. I had wanted him to feel the powerlessness I had felt my whole life. But prison, that was a different kind of destruction. Do we do it? Sarah asked. It is the kill shot. I thought about the way he had looked at me in the coffee shop, the way he had threatened to destroy my reputation, the way Trent had smiled when he handed me the eviction notice. Not yet, I said. Sarah looked disappointed. Gemma. We don't pull the trigger yet, I said. We show them the gun. While we were strategizing in the high-rise office, the Calloway family was fracturing in real time. I learned the details later, from the deposition transcripts and the court records, but I can picture it as clearly as if I had been there. It happened in the living room of the Elm Street house, the war room, as Trent called it. Bianca was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by boxes of legal discovery documents. The court had ordered the release of Daphne's digital correspondence as part of the undue influence investigation. Trent and Harlan were convinced the emails would prove my mother was senile or manipulated. They were looking for evidence of my villainy. Instead, Bianca found a time capsule. She had clicked on a folder marked Drafts. Sent. It contained emails my mother had written, but never sent to Harlan, letters she had written to vent, to clarify her thoughts, to keep her sanity. But there was one email that had been sent. It was dated 3 years ago. The recipient was a secure, scheduled delivery service, set to release the email to Bianca's personal address only in the event of a legal challenge to the estate. The subject line was, "To Bianca. When you are ready." Bianca opened it. My dearest Bianca, if you are reading this, you are probably angry. You are probably sitting in a room with your father and brother, and they are telling you that I stole from you. They are telling you that Gemma is a thief. I cannot make you believe me. I can only tell you what I saw. I saw a little girl who loved to paint. Do you remember? You used to paint in the sunroom for hours. You were so happy. And then, when you were 12, your father told you that artists were useless people who contribute nothing to the GDP. He threw your paints away. I found them in the trash, but I was too afraid to fish them out. I failed you that day. I watched you turn into a woman who values things over people, because that was the only currency Harlan accepted. I watched you become hard, because you thought hardness was strength. I left the money to Gemma, not because I love her more, but because she knows how to live without it. You and Trent, you have never been allowed to know who you are without the Calloway name. This is my final gift to you. Bianca, I am taking away the cushion. I am taking away the easy path. If one day you see the truth, if you see that Harlan is fighting for his ego, not for you, then you will have a choice. You can choose to be his daughter, or you can choose to be yourself. I hope you pick up a paintbrush again. Love, Mom. Bianca lowered the tablet. The room was quiet. Trent was pacing by the fireplace, ranting about the eviction strategy. We have her on the ropes, Trent was saying, punching his palm with his fist. Once the freeze hits, she will fold. We offer her $500,000 to walk away, and we keep the rest. Dad, you need to call the bank and tell them the liquidity is coming. I am handling the bank, Harlan muttered, pouring himself a drink. It was 11 in the morning. Bianca, are you listening? Trent snapped. You need to post another video. Cry this time. Say you found letters where she threatened Mom. Bianca looked at her brother. For the first time, she saw the desperation sweating through his expensive shirt. She saw the cruelty that he wore like a cologne. No, Bianca said. Trent stopped pacing. Excuse me. I am not posting anything, Bianca said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. And I am not lying anymore. Lying. Harlan turned around, the ice clinking in his glass. We are fighting for our birthright, Bianca. We are fighting against a usurper. She isn't a usurper, Bianca said. She is your stepdaughter. And Mom was scared of you. Don't be ridiculous, Harlan scoffed. She was. Bianca stood up. She was terrified, and so am I, and so is Trent, though he is too stupid to admit it. Watch your mouth. Trent stepped forward, his face flushing red. You are going soft. Did she get to you? Did Gemma offer you a cut? Gemma hasn't spoken to me in years, Bianca said, because we treated her like garbage, just like Dad taught us. She picked up her purse. Where are you going? Harlan demanded. We have a strategy meeting with Sterling at noon. I am going home, Bianca said, and I am deleting the posts. If you walk out that door, Harlan threatened, pointing a finger at her. You are out of this family. You get nothing from the settlement. Nothing. Bianca looked at her father. She looked at the man who had thrown away her paints. You don't have anything to give, Dad, she said. I think we both know that. She walked out. The door clicked shut, leaving Harlan and Trent alone in the silence of a house that was slowly being stripped of its lies. The hearing for the emergency asset freeze was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Thursday. The courtroom was packed. The press had gotten wind of the Callaway War, and there were reporters in the back row. Harlan loved an audience, usually, but today, he looked like a man walking to the gallows. He sat at the plaintiff's table, drumming his fingers on the wood. Trent sat next to him, looking furious. Bianca's chair was empty. Judge Holloway entered. She did not look pleased. I have reviewed the motion for the emergency freeze, she said, cutting straight to the chase. And I have reviewed the defense's counter-motion regarding the eviction notice. She looked at Harlan's lawyer. Counsel, your client attempted to evict the defendant from a property owned by a limited liability company that is not a party to this lawsuit. That is a gross overreach of jurisdiction. Your Honor, the lawyer stammered, we argued that the LLC is a pierced veil. You argued no such thing in your brief, the judge snapped. You simply tried to bully a tenant. The eviction is stayed. The motion is denied with prejudice. I let out a breath I had been holding for 2 days. The house was safe. Now, the judge continued, regarding the asset freeze, Mr. Callaway, you are claiming that the trust is fraudulent and that Ms. Moore is dissipating assets. This is a serious claim. Do you have evidence? Harlan stood up. His lawyer tried to grab his arm, but Harlan shook him off. He was unraveling. The absence of Bianca, the pressure of the audit, the looming deadline of the loan, it was all too much. The evidence is the money, Harlan shouted. She has $19 million that belongs to my company. The courtroom went deadly silent. Mr. Callaway, the judge said, please address the court through your counsel. I don't have time for counsel, Harlan yelled. His face was a map of broken veins. You don't understand. The notes are due. The 15th is next week. If I don't get access to that capital, the bank calls the paper I need that money. He stopped. He realized, too late, what he had just said. He hadn't said I deserve justice. He hadn't said my wife was manipulated. He had said, I need the money to pay my debts. Sarah Jenkins stood up slowly. She didn't need to shout. The room was so quiet, a pin drop would have sounded like a gunshot. Your Honor, Sarah said, the plaintiff has just admitted, on the record, that his motivation for this lawsuit is not the validity of the trust, but his own personal insolvency. He is seeking to access the trust assets to settle unrelated commercial debts. She picked up the file containing the UCC fraud evidence. Furthermore, Sarah continued, we have evidence that the debts in question are secured by fraudulent collateral. Mr. Callaway is not here seeking equity. He is here seeking a bailout for criminal mismanagement. Harlan looked around the room. He looked at the judge, whose face had turned to stone. He looked at Trent, who had buried his face in his hands. He looked at the reporters, who were scribbling furiously. And then he looked at me. He didn't look scary anymore. He didn't look powerful. He looked like a small, sad man standing in the wreckage of his own ego. It is my money, he whispered. his voice cracking. "I earned it. I am the husband." "You were the husband," Braxton said from the seat beside me, loud enough for Harlan to hear. "But you were never the partner." The judge slammed the gavel. "I have heard enough," she said. "We will reconvene in 10 minutes to discuss the dismissal of this case. And Mr. Calloway, I suggest you use those 10 minutes to call a criminal defense attorney." Harlan collapsed into his chair. The air in the room felt lighter, cleaner. The storm had broken. The roof had held, and for the first time, I knew I really, truly knew that I was going to keep the keys. The recess lasted exactly 10 minutes, but in that short span of time, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from a battleground to a funeral parlor. When Judge Holloway swept back into the room, her robe billowing like a storm cloud, she did not look at her docket. She looked directly at Harlan Calloway. We stood. The bailiff called the court to order. I glanced at Harlan. He was sitting slumped in his chair, his skin the color of old parchment. Trent was whispering frantically into his ear, likely scheming another move, another lie. But Harlan wasn't listening. He was staring at the empty space where his future used to be. "Please be seated," the judge commanded. She adjusted her glasses and picked up a single sheet of paper. She didn't shuffle through the mountains of evidence. She didn't need to. The truth had been laid bare, not by my lawyers, but by Harlan's own arrogance. "This court has heard the arguments regarding the validity of the Daphne Moore Trust," Judge Holloway began. Her voice was crisp, echoing off the wood paneling. "The plaintiff, Mr. Calloway, alleges that the deceased was mentally incompetent and subject to undue influence. However, over the course of these proceedings, the court has seen zero medical evidence to support this claim. What the court has seen is a consistent, documented history of a woman who was highly capable, financially literate, and meticulously prepared." She looked over her reading glasses at Harlan's legal team. "The plaintiff has also admitted, on the record, that the motivation for this contest is personal financial insolvency. This court is not a bank, Mr. Calloway, and a lawsuit is not a line of credit." Harlan flinched. It was a small movement, like a man bracing for a physical blow. "Therefore," the judge declared, bringing the gavel down with a sharp, final crack, "the motion to invalidate the trust is denied. The motion to freeze the assets is denied. The trust stands as written. Ms. Moore is the sole and rightful beneficiary of all assets contained within the Daphne Moore Trust, including the subsidiary known as Aurora Holdings." I felt a hand squeeze my shoulder. It was Sarah. I let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in my chest for 30 years. It was over. The money was mine. The house was mine. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice hardening, "given the frivolous nature of this litigation and the clear intent to use the legal system to harass the defendant into a settlement, I am invoking the bad faith exception regarding legal costs. The plaintiff, Mr. Calloway, is ordered to pay the full legal fees for the defense, effective immediately." Trent stood up, his face purple. "We can't pay that." "You know we can't pay that." "Sit down, sir," the bailiff barked, stepping forward. "That brings me to my final ruling," Judge Holloway said, ignoring Trent's outburst. She picked up a separate file, the one Sarah had submitted, regarding the double-pledged collateral. During the discovery phase of this trial, evidence was submitted suggesting that the plaintiff, Mr. Calloway, pledged the same commercial assets as collateral to 2 different lenders without disclosure. Specifically, the fleet and warehouse of Calloway Logistics. The room went deadly silent. This was the moment the civil case turned into something much darker. "This court has a mandatory reporting duty," the judge said. "I am referring the files regarding Mr. Calloway's financial disclosures to the district attorney's office for an investigation into bank fraud and perjury. The civil matter is closed. The criminal matter is now out of my hands." She looked at Harlan one last time. "You came here asking for equity. Mr. Calloway, you should have been careful what you asked for. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. Harlan didn't move. He sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, watching the judge exit the chamber. He wasn't just broke anymore. He was a target. The district attorney would not be as polite as Mr. Braxton. The fraud was on paper, signed in ink, and undeniable. He was going to prison. I stood up. I felt strangely light. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no desire to dance on his grave. There was just a profound sense of clarity. The monster under the bed turned out to be just a man in a suit who didn't know how to do math. Sarah began packing her briefcase. "We need to file the foreclosure on the business tomorrow," she said efficiently. "Before the DA freezes his assets, we need to secure the warehouse." "Do it," I said. I turned to leave, but the aisle was blocked. Bianca was standing there. She looked different. The polished, haughty armor she usually wore was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing a simple coat, not the designer furs she usually flaunted. She looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes were clear. Harlan scrambled up from his chair, clutching his chest. He saw Bianca and reached out for her, desperate for an ally. "Bianca," he rasped. "Bianca, listen to me. We need to appeal. We need to call the senator. I know people. We can fix this. I just need you to sign a character reference. I need you to stand by me." Bianca looked at her father. She looked at his shaking hands, his sweating forehead, the desperation radiating off him like heat. "Stand by you?" she asked softly. "We are Callaways," Harlan insisted, trying to summon the old authority. "We stick together. We are the victims here. You know that, right? You know Gemma stole from us." Bianca looked at me. She didn't glare. She didn't smile. She just looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time, not as the stepsister who didn't belong, but as the only person in the room who was actually free. "She didn't steal anything, Dad," Bianca said. "She just survived you." "Don't be stupid," Trent hissed, coming up behind her. "We have to stick together. If he goes down, the name goes down. We lose everything." Bianca stepped back, creating a physical distance between herself and the two men. "I don't want the name," she said. "What are you saying?" Harlan demanded. "Where are you going?" Bianca hesitated. She looked at the door. The world outside was uncertain. She had no money, no trust fund, and her degree was in art history, a subject Harlan had mocked for years. She was 32 years old and starting from zero. "I don't know," Bianca said. Her voice broke, but she didn't apologize. "I don't know," and that was the most honest thing she had ever said. She turned and walked out of the courtroom, alone, leaving her father and brother standing in the wreckage of their own expectations. Trent watched her go, then spun around to face me. He couldn't attack the judge. He couldn't attack the police. So he attacked the only target he had left. "You think you won," he screamed, his voice echoing in the emptying room. "You are nothing. You are a parasite. You took everything from us. You robbed us." Mr. Braxton stepped in front of me. He didn't look like an old notary anymore. He looked like a stone wall. He held up the heavy binder he had carried for 30 years. "Miss Calloway," Braxton said, his voice calm and gravelly. "Gemma did not take anything that wasn't hers. Your father borrowed money he couldn't pay. Your mother invested money she saved. The math is quite simple." "She gets nothing," Trent yelled, repeating the phrase that had haunted my childhood. "She deserves nothing." Braxton adjusted his glasses. He looked at Trent with a pity that was far worse than anger. "You seem to have forgotten the text of the affidavit," Braxton said. He opened the binder to the very first page, the page with the quote that started it all. "When Daphne sat in my office," Braxton said, "she told me exactly what you would say, and she left a response." He looked at Harlan, then at Trent. "She said, 'You will get nothing.'" Braxton closed the book with a soft thud. "It wasn't a prediction of Gemma's fate," Braxton said. "It was a description of yours." Trent opened his mouth to scream again, but the words died in his throat. The truth was too heavy to shout over. They had nothing, no money, No business, no reputation, and most importantly, no one to blame but themselves. I didn't say anything to them. I didn't need to. I turned my back on Harlan Calloway for the last time. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. My heels clicked on the floor. A steady, rhythmic sound. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped into the atrium. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of pale winter blue sky. I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the steps. The air was cold and sharp. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with it. For 36 years, I had held my breath. I had walked on eggshells. I had made myself small so I wouldn't take up space. Now, I stretched my arms. I took up space, and nobody stopped me. I didn't keep the money, not all of it. I kept enough. I wasn't a martyr. I kept the house. I fixed the transmission on my Honda. I bought a winter coat that actually kept out the wind. But the rest, the $19 million that had grown in the dark, while my mother knitted in the corner, I knew I couldn't just sit on it. That money was made from silence, and I wanted it to make noise. 6 months later, I sat in Mr. Braxton's office again. The mahogany table was the same, but the atmosphere was different. There was sunlight streaming in. "The paperwork is ready," Braxton said, sliding a document toward me. It was the charter for the Daphne Moore Foundation. We liquidated Callaway Logistics. We sold the trucks. We sold the warehouse. We sold the lake house to pay off the creditors. Harlan was currently awaiting trial under house arrest in a rented apartment, his passport confiscated. Trent had moved to Arizona to sell timeshares, but the proceeds from the liquidation, combined with the trust's assets, went into the foundation. "The North Star Scholarship," I read aloud. "Full tuition and living stipends for first-generation college students who have no family support." "Your mother would have liked that," Braxton said. "And the housing initiative," I said, pointing to the second clause. "Blue Spruce Properties will convert the old warehouse into affordable artist lofts. Subsidized rent. No evictions without cause." I signed the paper. The ink flowed smoothly. "You know," Braxton said, capping his pen, "you could have bought an island. You could have disappeared." "I don't want to disappear," I said. "I spent my whole life being invisible. I want to help other people be seen." I walked out of his office and down to the street. I passed a coffee shop, not the one where I met Harlan, but a different one. Through the window, I saw a girl sitting at a table. She looked about 18. She had a pile of textbooks in front of her, and she was counting out change to pay for a cup of tea. She looked tired. She looked worried. I stopped. I watched her for a moment. I thought about my mother. I thought about the thousands of cups of tea she had made, the thousands of insults she had swallowed, the years of planning she had endured just so I could stand here today. She had taught me that revenge isn't about burning the house down. It is about building a shelter that the fire can't touch. She had taught me that you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to be right, and you have to be ready. I walked into the coffee shop. I went to the counter and put a $100 bill in the tip jar. "The tea for the girl in the corner," I told the barista, "and a gift card for the rest." "Who should I say it is from?" the barista asked. I looked at the girl. She was still counting her coins. "Tell her it is from a silent partner," I said. I walked back out into the sun. I had a life to live, a life that was loud and messy and entirely, beautifully mine. My mother was right. Calmness is a superpower, but only when you are the one holding the keys. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet room, or maybe on your commute? Please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed Gemma's journey, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story of justice with even more people. See you in the next story.